Hi guys, David Michael here. Hydrastis canadensis, golden seal. Right here, you can see this kind of dead stem sticking up. If you look, that's right in the leaf axil. It kind of wraps itself around it, which makes this fuzzy leafed Eastern North America plant really distinguishable. In the spring, there'll be a red berry pod right here. They'll also, earlier in the spring, that's where the flower pod will be. I cannot say enough about this plant. It has antibiotic properties, and I consider it to be one of 3 very important North American herbs. And it's protected, threatened, or endangered in nearly every state that it grows in. I encourage you guys to do research on more than what I'm able to tell you in this video on this plant and its medicinal values. I can't even begin to explain how great this plant is. But the real reason I'm out here filming this is because I don't condone harvesting this in the wild for any reason. I do, however, want everyone who has property to look into forest farming. It loves loamy soils. Look into forest farming. There's a few videos on it on YouTube. Try to reestablish some of these important plants. This is one of them I consider to be very important because it has antibiotic properties. It's great for the flu. It's great for respiratory. It's great for many things. And the key chemical in it that's responsible for that is berberine. It has 3 chemicals in it that are noteworthy: berberine, hydrastine, and cannadine. These are the 3 medicinal valued chemicals that are about this plant. The root itself is very golden, and that comes from the chemical berberine. Now, there is something you can do to help save this plant and still utilize its medicinal value, and that is harvest barberry. Barberry is another super herb that, by its Latin name, Barberus vulgaris, is full of barberine. And we're gonna go collect that and show that to you and give a demonstration of just how easy it is to recognize. It's an invasive plant, so we really don't want it here. It helps promote Lyme disease by proxy. There's a video on YouTube about that. I think it's titled How Barberry Helps Spread Lyme Disease, or Does Barberry Spread Lyme Disease? Something along those lines. It's a great video. Guy did a lot of good work. He accumulated a lot of good data on that, so we can get all the wonderful benefits of golden seal, which I consider to be one of our #1 herbs in North America for preventative medicine, for curing the flu, bronchitis, and other things. Also, I need to say real quick, I'm not a doctor, so if you're sick, please seek medical attention. Don't attempt to use anything in this video as medical advice, because it is not medical advice. I do encourage you to do a lot of research, find out just how wonderful this plant is and why I'm talking about it the way I am. It is one of my favorites, if that's possible. One way that you can tell you have the plant, you see these stalks are dying and falling down. It is sustainable in that it transplants really easily, and it's on a rhizome that can be divided and replanted once you start forest farming. And one way to tell that you have it is to just kind of take your finger, move the leaves and dig around, and you'll start to see gold, a really bright yellow in the soil. And when you see that, there's some. you know you have it. See the gold right there? Now this particular root cluster looks like it has a family of 3 in it. Look for one to harvest here. We got greenbrier growing up among it. Here's 2 younger ones. Looking for one that I can harvest and show you in this pod. A good way of separating it. So we'll move over here and harvest this real quick. And then at the end of this video, after I show you the barberry itself, I am going to show you a trick that I use for this stuff right here. Now you want to dig around it quite a ways, because the rhizome itself will have capillaries. And those capillaries are a big part of the entire medicinal value of the root. So I get my hands under there and shake this all out. You see how golden this is, and you can see each rhizome. Now this rhizome can be broke and planted back. Each rhizome can be broke and planted back, and the plants can be divided. Now these capillaries on the rhizome are very important. So what I'm going to do is put a couple of these back real quick. And you don't want to bury this. You want the soil level to be right at that level. Just like that. Get this other one back in here. Cover it back up with leaves so it winters pretty good. When we get home, I'll show you what I do with this root to keep it fresh without having to dry it. Although most of the medicines are made from this dried root, I'm going to show you a trick I use in case someone starts to come down with something. Of course, we're going to seek medical attention, but when I take this, I'll have it fresh and I'll show you how to store it. Let's go find barberry. The invasive barberry, Barberus vulgaris. The best time to harvest this for its medicinal value is in the autumn. You notice these peculiar leaves, long and narrow and wide at the center. And usually they're just easy to spot because they're perfectly wide. These weird little teardrops. And of course it's thorny, very thorny. And I didn't bring gloves to harvest this, which you should do to harvest it. And berries, which are edible when red and soft, which is usually just before the frost. And usually the leaves are gone when I eat them. This one's not perfectly red, but they're not very tasty. They are edible. And I heard rumor that, show you guys this seed. You can see that seed. They got a very, very bitter taste. According to the research, the one chemical that makes Goldenseal and Barberry unique is barberine. And there is 5.5 to 7.5% barberine in these berries. But the greater majority of the barberine is in the root, and that's what Dawn and I are here to harvest. There's a couple of different things we can do with the root. One, we can dry it, and you can still use it for decoctions when it's dry, but it isn't as strong. And another thing you can do is you can take the root and cut it into pieces and put it in a Ziploc bag of water. Now you'll use the water in the decoction when you cook it. And then the other thing you can do is you can cut the roots into small pieces and very loosely, almost half of a jar is what you're going to do, which is not the proportion we usually do tinctures in, but half of the jar with loosely packed root, and fill the jar with good high quality vodka. That's how to make the tincture from this. We're going to harvest this plant even though that I didn't bring gloves, and I always harvest a small one. There's a big one right over here. They're not a very pretty plant. There's a big one right over here, and it's too big for me to harvest. All I brought was this little shovel. But these are invasive, and there is a YouTube video on how this helps spread Lyme's disease. The guy did a pretty good job. He went out and tested acreage that had barberry in it, the invasive barberry, and the tick count was quite a bit higher. So mice seem to love this plant in the winter because of the way snow builds around it, and mice are there, and they believe that that's probably why there are so many ticks under it. Now, last spring, Dawn and I did a Facebook video on barberry, and while I was messing with the plant, I had deer ticks crawling up my fingers. And that was 10 or 12 of them that I got on me in just a few seconds from handling the plant. So be warned of the deer ticks, and that ticks love this plant. But this is a wonderful substitute for Goldenseal, and that is the whole point. It's invasive, and it has all the antibiotic properties that Goldenseal has, and it has all the medical benefits that Goldenseal has, minus one or two things. But do some research on this and the chemical berberine, and see for yourselves what a miracle plant this is. Even though that it's invasive, it is a miracle plant for preventative medicines. So we're going to harvest this and show you what the root looks like, and if you're familiar with Goldenseal, you'll see exactly why this is a good Goldenseal substitute once you see how yellow this root is. I'm going to figure out where it is. It's usually a pretty long root, and sometimes it stretches for several feet. Remember, it is thorny, so when you harvest this, you're definitely going to want to use gloves. Now you can see how bright yellow this is when I peel the bark back. And that is the chemical berberine that makes it yellow. The same thing that makes Goldenseal gold makes this gold. So as rare as Goldenseal is, and as invasive as this plant is, especially in northeastern United States, there's absolutely no reason why we should be harvesting Goldenseal. We should be forest farming it and trying to bring it back and utilizing this in its place and in its stead. And the berries are edible, but you need to look up some recipes for that because they are pretty bitter. Okay, we're here in Dawn's kitchen. I wanted to show you two ways that I keep this fresh Goldenseal, and you can do this with other roots too if you want them fresh for a decoction. When it comes to using a decoction of Goldenseal for whatever sickness that you're trying to cure, common cold, the flu, whatever, definitely seek medical attention. But when you're using this, it works really good if you add echinacea to it. And I use one root for a decoction, and the problem is when you divide the rhizome into a single rhizome and you use the capillary roots that are coming off the rhizome, that is one batch of a decoction, which I use 2 cups of water on the stove, and I simmer it, and I add echinacea, about the same amount of root, and some dried elderberries. That's my Goldenseal decoction for bronchitis or sore throat or strep or anything that's coming on that is virus. Now, you're going to have more liquid than you're going to take, because you're only going to want to drink about 1/4 of a cup of that each day for 2 or 3 days. And if you have extra, you can freeze that after the decoction is made. So keep that in mind. But to have a fresh root, keep in mind that Goldenseal, Echinacea, all these roots, they freeze in the winter. So you put water in a Ziploc bag, the amount that you're going to use in a decoction, and you can use 1/4 to 1/2 cup of water. And what I do is I fill the bag with water and I begin to zip this shut, and then I push all the air out so that in this little space that I have left is still open. The water's gushing out of it. Once I get it all compressed, I zip it shut with the water still flowing through it, and that gives me a vacuum. So then I just roll this up and freeze it. And then when I make the decoction, I use the water that's in the bag and the root. So you have fresh root. It's frozen. You're using the same water that's in there. You're using all of it. So you don't lose any nutrients. Or you can use one of these nifty little sealed Tupperware type. I mean, this isn't Tupperware, but I just fill it full of water, put my root in there, and lock it, and set it in the freezer. Now some of this I do dry, and you can dry any of these roots and do whatever it is you're going to do with them. But do your research and find out which way you like to use it best. I personally like decoctions. I do not use Goldenseal or Barberry as a preventative medicine throughout the year. I use immune builders like I'll use Echinacea tea, I'll use elderberry, there's a goldenrod. I'll use a few things through the year. I drink teas that kind of keep my immune up, and then when I get sick is when I break out the serious herbs like Goldenseal and Barberry. Do look into the forest farming, definitely, so that you can have this Goldenseal, but keep in mind also that if you're in an area where there is Barberry, harvest that Barberry, get rid of that invasive species, and use it where you would use Goldenseal. So that's how I do it. That's my trick. Try your own concoctions, do your own research, and safe foraging.